Welcome everyone to our Coalition Basics training here provided by Epiphany Community Services. Today's topic is going to focus on the Strategic Prevention Framework. This is widely used amongst a lot of different organizations. As we all know, it is basically provided by SAMHSA. So I know there's even a Strategic Prevention Framework grant out there that I know some of our clients have, other people have applied for and are looking to hopefully be getting this year or maybe even applying next year. However, the Strategic Prevention Framework itself is going to be what we are focusing on today. And like I said, this is our Coalition Basics series, so we are going to try and stay at more of that grassroots level approach. And from there, if you have questions, concerns, we'll be more than willing to follow up with you and have a more in-depth conversation if we have to. Today's objective, so we're really going to start diving into what actually is the SPF, as it's more commonly referred to, framework, why would we use it, or where do we see it type thing. Then we're going to get into the 5 actual steps that make up the framework, followed by the 2 guiding principles that we need to keep in mind while using the framework as well. Alrighty, so for those of you who have never seen this before in your lives, here it is. This is the Strategic Prevention Framework. We were able to use the Guide to SAMHSA's Strategic Prevention Framework resource from their website. So that is where a lot of this information is pulled. I do have it linked here. I'll make sure to share the source link at the end of today too. That way you have that and can always go read more there and kind of see where we pulled some of our information and data from. With that being said, the first thing we're going to do is talk about the 5 SPF steps. So that's going to be our ones that are kind of surrounding the outside of our lovely diagram here in color. Of course, let's get into first, what is the SPF framework? Basically, to keep it in simple terms, it's going to be a guide to help behavioral health prevention planners set themselves up basically for success. It's a way for us to organize a plan through these different steps to help make sure that the plan that we are implementing has a high rate of success and is really addressing the issues that we see in our communities. This framework does also help provide a comprehensive approach for those prevention planners to really help them understand the substance use issues that their community faces and really how to plan to address them. As we all know, communities are not one and the same. You know, they might have very similar, layout. They might have very similar population sizes or population attributes. However, we can't always treat them all the same. So the SPF framework here, or the SPF framework, helps us really take a step back and look at the whole picture. We want to gather all the information, all the data needed. We want to make sure we're planning, we're implementing, as well as coming back to that lovely piece that we all love, which is evaluation. So we're really going to dive into each of these steps today that we are seeing here, as well as making sure to spend some time on the sustainability piece and the cultural competency piece as well. So let's get into our 5 SPF steps. The first and foremost one we're going to start with is assessment. We obviously have to have assessment first because we can't know what we need to do without assessing it, right? So pretty self-explanatory there. Within our assessment step, we want to make sure that we're analyzing information about problems, goals, as well as the factors affecting them. So a lot of times in our work as substance abuse or substance use prevention professionals, like a lot of our clients are, you guys are looking at your logic models and basically saying, why are these our logic models? Are these problems, goals, risk factors, local conditions, what we are actually seeing? We're going to analyze those and really complete the entire community assessment piece to make sure that those are valid, right? We want to make sure that our definition of our community is valid. Is what we're seeing in our community actually true? As well as community history. That can kind of play into the definition of your community by looking back at the history a bit more, seeing maybe where you were 2 years ago versus where you are now, or going even further back and saying, you know, has our community came a long way in terms of positive, or has it kind of maybe taken a turn for the negative in some of these different problems we're looking at? The next thing we need to do is also assess the data, or a needs assessment. So looking at the data, we all know we love needs assessments, and really seeing where our time and planning efforts should really be directed. Then we also need to do a resource assessment. So we all know that in the type of work we do, we unfortunately cannot do what we need to do without resources, whether resources be cash, cold hard money in our hands, whether that be people time or the people and partners that we have developed through the years, as well as, you know, supplies and other resources that we come across along the way. Of course, money is always one of the biggest factors there, but we also have to make sure to do a resource assessment to make sure that we have the necessary partners and other things in place. And then lastly here under our community assessment is obviously our problem statements. Making sure the way we frame our problem statements is applicable to the work we will be doing, but also not too generalized to where we cannot make any kind of accomplishments on those problems, right? We want to make sure that they're clear, specific, and attainable problem statements. We love our SMART outcome objectives, you know, SMART, and listing them out like that as well. So we definitely want to make sure that our problem statements are very reliable there for us to use. With that being said, that sums up the assessment part. So the first step of our 5 steps of our strategic prevention framework. The next one we're going to get into is capacity. So we did our assessment, we've assessed everything, we've gathered information, we did that whole step, which a lot of times can take some time on our end. Some of our clients, other coalitions around the world, that may take them a year, maybe longer to do, to gather all that information. And then our next step is to really look at our capacity. Do we have the right people at the table based on what information we've gathered to build our organization in the way, and have we built our organization in a way in which we will see success? So basically we need to take our step back and say, okay, we gathered all this information, we see what we have, but, you know, are we actually set up to address these goals? You know, that's okay if we're not. Sometimes it's okay to realize, hey, you know, we're definitely capable, we have the capacity to do problem A. However, you know, after diving in, gathering more information, doing the community assessment, I don't think we have enough capacity to address, you know, problem B, which is totally, totally fine, right? Because we want to set ourselves up for success. We don't want to set ourselves up to fail. So making sure that we take this capacity piece into consideration is very important. So within this, we a lot of times tend to see capacity building, because if we do not have the capacity at that time, we might need to take a step back and be like, okay, we don't have the capacity now, but could we build coalition membership partnerships to have that capacity, right? So is this a place where we can definitely grow our capacity to still be able to accomplish it, or is it really not going to be in the cards for us? We need to make sure that we're organized for success as well as making sure we work on leadership development. Having people at the table is great. However, in this type of work, we know all too well that we rely heavily on volunteers. But at the end of the day, we need good volunteers. We need volunteers that have that buy-in, you know, want to see our coalition, our organization succeed. We need to see those who really want to help step up and take that leadership role, whether it be leading an event or, you know, leading a committee or something like that, right? We want to make sure that we're really grooming that leadership role within our members, and we're seeing that they really have a buy-in within this work that we're going to be doing. So that's the capacity piece. Keeping in mind as we go along, these steps do kind of build on each other, right? So it helps to do our assessment first, then look at our capacity. And next we're going to get into the planning area. So planning is my favorite step. I think it is very important and really sets a coalition or organization up to either fail or succeed. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen some coalitions that have had great plans, but they just, no matter what they do, cannot push that ball across the finish line, and they can't get to that success that they were looking for. However, sometimes when that happens, to me, in my eyes, the best thing you can do is adjust. So maybe you adjust and, turn to the left because it'll be a little bit easier to finally get that ball pushed across. Or maybe we need to kind of circle back around and make sure that what we're actually trying to attempt to achieve is worth all this effort we're doing, or is it something we should maybe diverge into a different path or onto a different path. So planning is one of my favorite things because of that reason. There's so many different ways that we can plan, make sure that we set ourselves up for success. And one of those big things is developing a model for change and a plan for action. So we all love logic models. We all love strategic and action plans. But my biggest tip here is to make sure that you are not just making these plans, making these logic models for the sake of making them. Make sure that you have all those voices, the coalition members, board members, committees, everyone at the table who's going to be doing this work. Because at the end of the day, I can draw out a great plan for my organization or my coalition. I can put all my time and effort into it, do all this research, make this great, huge, drawn out plan that I think looks fabulous and is going to be great. However, if I don't have the people there to say, yes, Jessica, we can do this, or no, Jessica, maybe we should do this instead, then the work's not going to get done probably. And if it does, it'll probably be done half good and half bad. So making sure that it's not a one-way plan. It's okay to do a lot of the planning yourself, as long as before we finalize it, we're asking the people that are going to be doing this work, is this attainable? Is this something that makes sense for what we're ultimately working to achieve in terms of our problems and our goals? Are we developing a logic model that is realistic, not just developing it to develop it? And also making sure we're not spreading ourselves too thin. It happens quite often because we see a lot of different problems and issues in our communities, right? And as much as we would love to address anything and everything, sometimes it can be a lot easier to focus in on one or two areas and get really good at those. And then that gives you the freedom and the time to break off and do some other things that you may have wanted to do as well. So definitely make sure that you're not being too specific, drawn into just maybe one problem, because sometimes obviously that gets you down that kind of siloed path. You're only trying to do one thing. However, don't spread yourself too thin in the planning capacity either, and trying to say, oh, we're going to do everything and anything, because that can a lot of times lead to burnout, and your coalition members don't love that, right? They don't want to be pulled in so many different directions that they don't have time to do the work they want to for the coalition. So keep that in mind as well. Alrighty, so we have assessed and done our assessment. We have talked about capacity and looked at our capacity. We have now completed our plans, finished our planning. Now we're getting into the actual implementation, right? This is the fun part. This is the part everyone loves to do. It's when we actually get the work done. So we need to take action and develop a plan on taking action. So even though we finished our planning phase, it's not always done quite yet. Planning does tend to come back around depending on where we're at in our implementation. So don't forget that a lot of times, just because we created our plan and we finalized it and we printed it out and we said, here it is, does not mean it's done. To me, a plan is a very fluid document. There is definitely room for change and updates. And that's definitely going to come into play here when it comes to implementation. Here, really, we're trying to implement effective interventions. So at the end of the day, implementation, we need our coalition members to help us with this. We need our youth, we need our partners, we need everyone on board in this step to help us carry that ball, so to speak, towards the finish line, right? We want to make sure everyone who can be there as involved in helping us implement our plan and actions. And then once we get done, or once we carry that ball across the finish line, we have implemented what we had planned, we need to evaluate it. Did this problem or did this plan that we put into place actually have an impact? Is there something we could have done differently, right? Did it actually change the outcomes that we intended it to change? Sometimes we get very wrapped up in our work. We spend a lot of time assessing, looking at capacity, doing the plan. Sometimes we might get wrapped up in it and really lose sight of the actual outcome we're working to change. And when it's all said and done and we look at our evaluation, we might say, wow, guys, we did really great, which is awesome. Anytime we get anything accomplished, it's great, right? We always want to make sure to celebrate that. We also need to make sure to use evaluation as a tool to say, did we stay on target? Did we really work to achieve those outcomes that we were trying to? The other big thing here is making sure to document our progress so we can record feedback and get good feedback on our activities, our steps, and different things that we were doing. If we don't record it, sometimes it feels like it didn't happen, right? They always say, did it happen if you didn't take a picture or whatever? So sometimes when it comes to documenting, not that you have to document a lot, but just even making sure to document some small things along the way so we have good information to look back on. That way, if we did make a mistake somewhere along the way, we don't want to make that mistake again, so it's good to have documentation of that. Same thing like they say in history, history is doomed to repeat it if we don't learn from the past. So making sure that we're kind of taking that same approach when it comes to evaluation, as well as sharing those successes. It's really important because in the type of work we do, there is tons of organizations, coalitions, working on prevention of substance abuse and misuse amongst youth around the country, right? There's tons of people who get drug-free communities funds, different funding to address similar issues and things like that in terms of really just public health and prevention in general. So we need to make sure that we are sharing our successes, help others learn so they don't make the same mistakes you guys maybe did, or maybe they can help you guys make your program better if you share some of your successes you had and say, hey, if you guys are doing it, maybe you should look at doing it this way because we had a lot of trouble with our plan and how we did it. So if you tweak yours a little bit, it might work better. Really help each other out, because at the end of the day, we're all here together. We all want each other to succeed. So making sure to share that success is a huge, huge part of evaluation as well. Alrighty, so we've talked about our 5 different steps of our SPF. Now we are going to get into the guiding principles. So we have our lovely little flowery diagram. And in the middle, we see 2 principles, and that's going to be sustainability and cultural competence. These should always, always, always be in the back of your mind, floating around in your thoughts, no matter what step you are in within the SPF framework. So the first one we're going to talk about is sustainability. I like to call this the bad S word in terms of prevention work, because I think this word tends to be one that people kind of see and go like, ooh, do we really have to talk about that? Like, it's one that we don't always love to see, but at the end of the day, it's one that's really important in our work, because if we want to make sure that our efforts and these changes that we're putting in place now stay around and we're worth it, we need to make sure we look at our sustainability in the long run. Sustainability really means to be able to stay around long enough to see the desired changes in your community and really see that play out. The big things to keep in mind in terms of what do we need to sustain in terms of our organizations and coalitions. The first one, and by far, I think the most important one, is people. Without people, what are you going to get done? Usually not a whole lot, right? People make decisions, people help further the work. Without any people, what can we do, right? We could probably still do stuff, but it would be a lot harder than if we had actual coalition members, board members, committees, and people who are actually there wanting to do this work. The next thing we have is that we are going to need to sustain is the model in which we use. This sometimes people don't really tend to think of it. And this is why we push a lot of our clients to focus heavy on their logic model and their action plans and things like that, because it's really important to make those basically what you live, breathe, die by. You know, your mission statement, things like that can come into play here too. But if you're constantly kind of changing up your model, you know, where your focus areas lie and not having a direct path, that can confuse people. It makes you guys look a little undesirable even maybe to funders, because they're like, wow, they are just kind of bouncing all over the place. They don't really know who they are, what they're trying to do. They don't seem very task oriented, so to speak. So just making sure that you have your model and you're really sustaining that long term and all the way through, it'll help make you guys a stronger coalition and really look better to funders and look like a more cohesive group. Next, what do we need to sustain is relevant work. So pretty self-explanatory there. Resources is probably the second biggest one in my eyes. Obviously, you know, people are very important. We need people to do this work, but we also do need resources, and people do kind of go into that resource piece as well. But also, you know, it's going to come down to that money. Everyone would love to work for free if they could, right? Especially when it comes to this awesome work we do. If we could survive off not making money, everyone would do this work, right? Because it's great work and it's rewarding work. However, to get it done, you know, money makes the world go round, and we do need money and support, you know, whether that be grant funds, whether that be a line item in the county budget, you know, you just never know. But it's so helpful to have that money piece because it's freeing, and your coalition is able to focus and look at different things, you know, focus in on their actual work, not trying to find money all the time. The last thing here is strategies and interventions. This piece, again, comes into play mainly because we tend to see those environmental strategies sustainable more in a long-term fashion, right? We try to push a lot of our clients to implement environmental strategies like policy changes, changing of consequences and different things like that, physical design changes, because in the long run, those are a lot easier to sustain and help see a change in the community long term than some of the other strategies may be, or some of the other lighter program work that we might see. You know, programs are great, and we love programs for our youth, for even adults or businesses, but in the long term, how easy are those to sustain? Not always the easiest, right? Because you need someone to fund them. You need someone to do the work, provide the training, provide the support class, you know, whatever that may be. However, some of our other physical design changes, like actually changing a policy, once it's signed, passed, it's there, right? It is there in the fine print until maybe it needs revising 10, 20 years down the road, or, you know, maybe it needs updated, something like that. So just kind of keep that in mind in terms of sustainability when it comes to those strategies and interventions that we're really heavily working on. The last guiding principle we have here is that cultural competence piece. So really here what we're looking at is the ability to bring together different behaviors, attitudes, and policies and work effectively in cross-cultural settings to produce better results. I know, kind of wordy, but really what we want to make sure that we're doing is being inclusive, is what that comes down to. We want to make sure that what we are doing is bringing together different communities, different groups, different attitudes, different behaviors, to make sure that the work we are implementing makes sense for all. We don't want to make it obvious or notable that we're trying to like call out one group over the other, right? In some cases, it might start to look down or go down that path. However, we really want to make sure that to make sure our work lasts and is sustainable over time, again, we're looking at this cultural competence piece. And really through all the phases of the SPF, not just at the end, not just at the evaluation, not just at the planning, really all the way throughout, because we want to make sure that we're having that lens on and we're not kind of too narrow focused. We also could include, but not limited to, other attributes like age, race, religion, educational attainment, financial status, and gender. You know, depending on your community and when you do assessments and plannings and different things, and even capacity building. Different communities might look at these pieces differently depending on what your work is directed towards. So definitely it's okay to pull in some of these other kind of attributes and excuse me, behaviors, different things like that, because that's definitely something we don't want to ignore. We want to really embrace and look through that lens of all those different things when we're doing our SPIF and, you know, framework planning, different things like that. Alrighty, so we have made it through the 5 steps. We have made it through the 2 guiding principles. This is, like I said, a very kind of glossed over, generalized look version of the strategic prevention framework and the basics really that go into it. With that, I just want to briefly pull up, this was the main resource that we did use for our webinar today. It's just the SAMHSA's Guide to Strategic Prevention Framework. It's a great document. It is not too long as some other documents can be, but it is a great information piece when it comes to the strategic prevention framework, the basics, the general guiding principles, and why we use it, how we use it, sort of thing. So definitely check that out if that's something you're interested in and kind of want to really dive more into this topic. That is a great resource. And with that, guys, thank you for joining me today for our Coalition Basics series. Other than that, thank you guys and have a great rest of your day.